So today in Motherhood Week, I want to talk about optimal motherhood. You might remember that Optimal Motherhood is the title of the book that I wrote a couple years ago about motherhood. But what do I mean and my co-author mean when we talk about optimal motherhood? Well, it has its roots in my theorization. It's a concept I developed to describe the way we treat mothers now as somebody that has to create the most perfect human ever through getting everything right in their child's development. And because my original PhD training was in Victorian literature, I trace these roots back to the Victorian era concept of the cult of true womanhood. The great thing about Victorians is that they weren't subtle at all. And so this is a phrase that they use themselves about basically saying what the woman's place in the world should be. They believed that a woman her value was determined by how good of a mother, wife, and sort of person in the house she was. One of my students once defined it as it was as though the woman was like a scented candle, and however pure and perfect she was would purify the home just by virtue of her being there. Now, a key thing about the cult of true womanhood is that Victorians, and this applied to Norwegian 1800-tallet samfunns also, they thought that this woman should be very passive and in the background. They even felt like if you're a mom with a short temper, because you need to be such a perfect mother in the cult of true womanhood, you should hire babysitters to deal with your kids all day, and you should only see them 1 hour a day when you're capable of being totally perfect and calm, blah, blah, blah. But what we identified in our research in our book, and just what I've noticed as my experience as a mom, is that as women gained more independence and could do more outside the house, they stopped having this role as being the perfect domestic figure, and it really stopped being about being the perfect wife and housewife and more about being the perfect mother. But because women were active outside of the house, this also ceased being a passive role. And with optimal motherhood, I argue that women are now expected to be intensely involved in their children's lives and intensely active in shaping them into being the perfect world citizen. And damn if that isn't a lot of pressure for women. I think some studies show that we spend about 70% more time with our kids than we ever did before, and yet we still are expected to never lose our patience with them. That's a tall order. You recall, the Victorians maintained a semblance of a perfect temperament with their kids by just hiring nannies so that the mom could look perfect for short periods. Now we're expected to be with them all the time, be feeding them perfectly, be educating them perfectly, and never be stressed about it, right? The other major difference that I'll cover today is that the cult of true womanhood in the Victorian era was a collectivist value. It was a problematic value based on the idea that British people were the best in the world, but it was this value that the mother was contributing to a better society. But since the development of optimal motherhood in probably post-1950-tallet, after the 1950s, it's become incredibly individualistic. The mother and the nuclear family alone is responsible for this, and we don't have that community presence. So these are the two big shifts where we theorize in our book that I wrote with my co-author and colleague, Jess Clemens, that this trajectory maintained, we have this legacy from the Victorian era, but it's also shifted to meet this, to match up with the modern world in ways that I argue actually add a lot more pressure to us. Again, if you want to hear more about this, I will be talking about this with my friend Juliana, who's also a historian of motherhood. We'll be talking on Saturday, November 2nd from 3 to 5 at the Feministhuset i Trondheim. And then after, we're going to try to start making our own community and go out for dinner with everybody that was there. Also, Juliana is coming here for dinner tonight because I'm all about community for moms, and hopefully we're going to be doing a live later, I think, tonight. So if you don't live in Trondheim, that's one option for you as well, is to tune in tonight.